What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another weather forecast. And I hope you guys are enjoying your wonderful day. I do apologize if my videos are getting very inconsistent. I do have tennis games every Tuesday and Thursday, so on those days I really won't be able to post, which is why I won't be posting tomorrow. So I do apologize for that. But before I get in the video, I want to go ahead and tell you guys to subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. Specifically, if you love severe weather forecasts, as this will be becoming more trendy topic on my channel as we get closer to April, specifically the heart of the severe weather season throughout the summer. As well, hit the bell icon if you want to get notified as soon as I post. Hit like button as well if you really enjoyed the video, so I know I can post more of these type of videos. And as well, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. But in this video, we're going to be talking about why the second half of March can be quite active because of the upcoming pattern change in the United States here, and what this can do and how it'll affect the severe weather, specifically for the South and as well portions of the central United States here. So we're going to be seeing how this upcoming pattern can lead to some decent activity across the second half of March. So from next week to obviously into April 1st. So let's go ahead and get to the weather forecast. So this is a look now at the next 66 hours out. So basically what we're going to start seeing is we're going to start seeing some really significant warm fronts develop across the eastern United States. So we're going to start getting a La Nina-like pattern, not this week necessarily, but later into next week here. So you can kind of see once I get into next week, some really warm air across portions of the United States, here specifically the eastern and central United States, and then we're starting seeing some very cold air across portions of the western United States, and that's kind of why usually, typically, not every year, but typically on average, every La Nina year tends to be above average activity for severe weather. And for this reason, because you have the cold air to the west, which brings that cold, unstable, or you got that cold, unstable air meeting with the really warm air, and you got that Gulf moisture coming here with the big warm air here. So you can kind of see after you have that warm, really warm temperature with that cold air coming in, and they meet, going to create a ton of instability, which is why this type of pattern will bring in potentially some very good activity as long as there's moisture and as long as the temperatures are right. And with these really significant warm fronts, the temperatures will be well over enough than rate the cost of your weather. So really looking at Wednesday, March 10th, there is supposedly going to be moisture in the area, specifically for the south central portions of these areas. Really, I'm really watching out for this month here, because that's kind of reaching a really warm temperatures. Get that cold air coming in these areas. It's going to be really good, and that's when we're seeing all our moisture this month. So we're really going to be really watching out for these areas. But even the Great Lakes getting a nice warm up here, possibly 20 degrees above average. So not just the south, but this is going to be this is going to be a constant thing throughout between next week. Is going to start, that La Nina pattern going to start coming in play by next week, and it's going to be go not next, it's going to go from next week, of course, the third week of March and the last week of March. So 3 weeks of really good La Nina like patterns. This cold air continues to push more to the east here, so we're going to be seeing some very cold air across much of the western United States here. And there you see this warm air continuing to develop across mainly, specifically, the southern United States. That's where we've seen the overall warmest areas this month, of course. But this cold air is going to continue to make its way to the west here, to the east, with this really warm air in these areas. So that's going to be leading to that instability, possibly even a dry line developing these areas. So really, of course, watching for these areas. We have the really warm temperatures, of course. If there's moisture in play, it'll be even more perfect pattern, as we will have all that moisture there. And then another pattern, there you go. So a third straight, or actually a fourth straight, really big significant warm front across the eastern United States, with the warmest air in the south of the United States. And there you got that cold air, specifically kind of in the west here. But with a pattern like this, we had that cold air kind of more towards the north. That's where we start seeing some storms developing across these areas here. Kind of seeing our first storms possibly develop overall in the Midwest here. But then once we get later into now not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday, March 17th, this colder kind of goes a little bit very even more far east into areas like the Midwest and Central Plains. So gonna really keep eyes out for areas like the southeast coast here, possibly even Georgia, the Florida Panhandle. So throughout this whole month, gonna be really watching for some areas specifically in these areas. Of course, won't be a perfect circle or perfect area, but kind of really just watching these general areas because of this type of pattern we're seeing from next week with the warm air really impacting these areas with the colder to the west. But if we're really talking bullseye this month, I'm really watching these areas right here in western Dixie Valley because that's where we're seeing our most amount of moisture this month, which I'll show later in the video. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the European has to say for the next few days. So this is what the European has to say for the next 72 hours. So kind of seeing our first deep look at kind of, I guess, our first La Nina or I guess La Nina like presence really starting to begin. Obviously it's not gonna get there just yet, but kind of seeing that warm air finally developing there across the plains. But there you see that really warm air, this big massive warm front is going to end this pattern we've been seeing for the past few days so far in early March and late of last month. So that cold air is going to finally start developing across these areas in the west. That cold air will finally end across the east. And this big warm front is going to be the beginning of a very different pattern than we've been seeing here. So there you see that big warm air, possibly 29, even 33, 34 degrees above average. So we may even see our first 60s across the Midwest here. So going to increase this potential for severe weather more towards north this month here. But again, not just temperatures, you gotta look at the moisture as well and see where the most shear is. But that cold air continues to strengthen here. So obviously, as we get that La Nina-like pattern, it's going to possibly increase that severe weather chance. So there you see that really cold air specifically in these areas. And if we get the moisture at the same time, you can really be watching for severe weather developing across these areas here. Specifically, of course, kind of right in the Mississippi River, right here is really we can barely see our very good temperatures and as well really good amount of moisture. So of course, with this cold in the backside and this warm air right here due to that high pressure, we're going to be seeing some very nice temperatures, variable for severe weather, and as well unstable air. So as we continue throughout the month, this is now March 13th. See that cold air kind of stretching kind of far to the east, so that's going to kind of start leaving areas. If there's moisture, of course, only if there's moisture and all the ingredients are there, including cape and all that, and little cap, we're going to be really watching for some severe weather, moving kind of more to the east or more to the north, just depending on kind of where these cold fronts kind of make their way, obviously. But either way, we will be seeing a pretty good pattern for severe weather developing later this month. Let's go ahead and get a look at now the CFS weekly here. So this is the look at week 1. So this is from, I believe, now to March 10th. So obviously between now and the next few days, we really won't be seeing a good severe weather pattern, at least for any areas that I know of. However, once we get into the second week here, you're going to get a better pattern here. That cold air is back in the west now. Got that very warm air in the eastern United States, of course. Although these areas will be seeing way higher above their average than these areas. Dixie Valley obviously has a way warmer average, so they're gonna start seeing a lot warmer temperatures here. Can start getting our first 70s up there into areas far in Missouri. Can start getting our first 70s there across Kansas. So we're gonna start seeing some really warm temperatures across these areas here. And with that cold air being unstable, with that unstable air because the cold air to the west, gonna really watch for severe weather between next week here. So from March 10th to March 17th, and then between March 17th and March 24th, you still got that similar pattern. That cold air really sticking around the west with that warm air kind of weakening a good bit. However, again, the averages in these areas are still good enough, some 60s and 70s, good enough to have some severe weather. Obviously not a whole outbreak. I'm not expecting at all an outbreak this month. Nobody does. However, we are going to start seeing an increase in activity that what we'll be seeing for the first week of March and maybe even a little bit of the second week. But once we get past March 10th, I do believe activity could be quite frequent, not like high risk, not moderate, not enhanced, but I do believe we can kind of see some more slight risks, and I do believe we'll kind of be seeing some pretty even more widespread events of severe weather than what we have already seen. Like I've been mentioning throughout the whole video frequently, the moisture. So I say that because there's going to be a lot of times where the eastern United States is dry. So obviously, if it's very dry atmosphere and there's unstable air, it's really unlikely that storms develop really because you gotta have all that moisture. So that's why I kind of have my bullseye area kind of really small, because we're gonna be seeing a really small area in the south central and southeast. We'll be seeing that at least frequent amount of moisture with the unstable right behind them with that dry line. So I'm gonna really watching this area right here, but we will be seeing some frequent, maybe twice a week kind of moisture waves across the south central here, or the south and the southeast. You can kind of see, we're gonna be seeing as these high pressure move more to the south, very dry. You kind of see that southeast ridge right there, and then you see we will be seeing some times we get some slight moisture for any low pressures that kind of make a way, kind of little front like that. We're gonna be seeing some areas of moisture, but again, this won't really be enough necessarily. There's still a lot of dry air there, so really not enough. But it's these type of systems that I do think can actually bring in that severe weather. You can kind of see at this point, March 13th, we have a good amount of moisture here. You can kind of see across anywhere from Dixie Alley all the way up to the east. And let's go ahead and see, actually check a look at the actual March 13th. You can kind of see this is actually March. This is March 13th. There you go. You see that really cold air to the west and that really warm air right here in the south central. So you can kind of see this isn't really the area at that point where we're actually really do that. This will kind of be the area to really watch out for on that type of day, March 13th. You can see the really warm temperature with the kind of the dry line right behind with the moisture right in those very similar areas here. So that's kind of these type of low pressures that bring that really moist eastern half there of that system. These are the things you can kind of see those possibly if we have, of course, a cold front, which we will be seeing that same day. We'll be seeing a similar pattern, like possibly some squall lines or QLCSs, because they develop right on that cold front, allowing for some straight line systems. Which if the moisture ends up like this, it will be favorable for that. So not seeing outbreaks obviously, but going to be seeing some frequent events. And then moisture becomes even more frequent later into the second half of March. This is the 16th right after, some more moisture. And let's go ahead and see March 16th, see what we're seeing where in the temperatures there. March 16th, and there you go. You got that really warm air. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit less, actually, that colder kind of weaken a bit, but still, as long as you have that moisture and those really warm temperatures, we could see some storms developing in general. They won't be as severe. And then we have another big outbreak here. Not outbreak, obviously, but I mean, I guess a big wave, not outbreak, but big wave of moisture kind of continuing. And this will bring in quite an active, possibly late third week to beginning fourth week of March, as long as the La Nina pattern, at least the warm east and cold west develops and dry lines develop. They really possibly increase the activity than what we're seeing in the beginning of March. Another big factor, of course, is the shear. The more shear, the better for severe weather development. Completely different than the tropics. So you see, obviously, this week the shear really won't matter because we won't be seeing too favorable severe weather atmospheric conditions. But once we kind of get later after March 10th, we're going to be seeing increasing shear, specifically across the southern United States here, whether for the southwest or it's the southeast, as well as some good amount of shear moving up into the Midwest. So I do believe severe weather could start developing all the way up to Illinois, Indiana this month, possibly even Ohio. Not saying there's gonna be tornadoes there. I doubt there will, but I think we'll see our first, I guess, thunderstorms down these areas this month. Temperatures will really be on the rise, 60s. Some areas down here even getting the 70s, and even some areas down here getting in the 80s. So really, temperatures will be rising. We're seeing 20 to 25 degrees above average in these areas with shear and some spotty moisture waves. If it all comes at the same time, I do believe we will be seeing some widespread, at least one or two widespread severe weather events this month in general, with other scattered ones for specifically small regions like Dixie Alley or the South Central Ozarks there. But however, the point is this year will be very very consistent across specifically the southeast and the east in general. You see really specifically these areas, but of course you got to also kind of match it up with the moisture and match it up with the dry lines and all of that. So of course kind of puts our circle for these areas. You see really dry air, or not dry air, sorry, really heavy amount of shear there. It's just going to be quite favorable if this year continues for events. So it doesn't really matter when the moisture comes. There's always going to be shear there, as long as at least all the way to March 13th. But GFS, which goes to March 19th, still shows a very similar pattern there. With the La Nina, of course, we're going to be seeing some really strong high pressures and a lot of big fronts. So it's going to really increase the shear, so quite dramatically, actually. So yeah, it's definitely going to be really interesting what we see in the next few weeks. Last thing we look up before I show you guys my map for who I think you see the most active March in general, we're gonna be looking at the temperatures, and this is actually a look at tomorrow's high temperature. So you see all the way up to tomorrow, we're gonna start seeing even 55 degrees all the way up into north western Montana. So that's well above average. Seeing now some 70s and maybe even spotty 80s across western Texas there, but in general, we're seeing some very widespread 60s and 70s all the way up into areas 60s in Kansas there, and getting 70 in Oklahoma there. So getting in a quite warm. You see 73, 74, 75 across those areas, but these 50s, mid 50s there, high 50s kind of stretch all the way up to areas like the Dakotas. Trying to see some 60s back in the Northwest now, so it's overall becoming spring. But that'll all change for the West, because we're gonna start getting really cold air across these areas, but really warm air across these areas. So it's gonna kind of be the complete opposite, I guess. In the next 2 days or 3 days, we'll see a complete different pattern switch. You can see now colder back in the west, but this warmer continuing to increase across the Central Plains, getting out nearly 60 degrees in far southern South Dakota, getting now upper 40s and nearly 50 degrees across the Midwest there, 60s or 60s possibly across Missouri, 56 there in Iowa. So we're seeing actually possibly similar temperatures in northern Georgia than all the way up to South Dakota. So that's something you don't really see typically in March or usually at all in the winter. So definitely really interesting the case here, but again, these temperatures will continue to become, oops, I don't mean to do that, widespread. I mean, look at this, 61, 61, or even maybe some lower 60s across South Dakota, getting our first 70s in Nebraska by early next week. Possibly some 70s developing across Kansas. So we actually may see the same temperatures, of course, in areas like Georgia, for example, or even Arkansas, or even colder temperatures in Oklahoma than what we're seeing there all the way up into areas like Nebraska. Colder temperatures in Texas than in Nebraska in March. I mean, we're going to be seeing some really warm air here, really cold air here, 20s and teens. So that's just not going to be looking good whatsoever for these areas. Actually, that's a little bit too big, but not looking good in general for the Southeast or portions of the Ozarks. I mean, look at that, 73 in Kansas, 50s and 60s now developing across the Great Lakes. So it's going to get quite warm here. Now getting 65 in Wisconsin by next week, exactly a week from now, nearly 70, getting, I believe, 68 across Illinois. Widespread 60s, almost 70s down to the mid-Atlantic. So overall, this eastern United States will be very warm, especially as well, not eastern, but as well central. So this all could be in general. These temperatures enough will be really good for severe weather development. Specifically, of course, we have mid 70s, maybe some spotty high 70s across some days in Dixie Alley. We obviously will have some cold fronts, but that'll kind of stay kind of limited into the far, I guess, northeast version of the Southeast, there in Georgia, Alabama, and all that. But overall, temperatures will be generally favorable, not only for the Southeast, but all the way up to the plains and Great Lakes for some severe weather, at least small storms across Illinois or those areas there in Kansas and Nebraska. But some bigger storms and maybe some more widespread events, maybe a slight risk across Dixie Alley and portions of the southern United States. So this is my overall forecast to where I think we'll be seeing the most active March this month. So of course, just because you're in the whites doesn't mean you gotta freak out. Of course, the white doesn't symbolize a high risk or anything deadly. The high risk or the white just symbolizes where we see the most active severe weather throughout the month. And the light red doesn't symbolize you're not getting anything. It just symbolizes the light red symbolizes you get severe weather this month, but it'll be very inconsistent because obviously in those areas in light red, we'll get a lot more dry, frequent air than what we're seeing in Dixie Alley with a lot more moist air. As well, we're going to be seeing a lot less shear across the upper Great Lakes than what we're seeing in Dixie Alley, and we're still going to be seeing some really cold temperatures across these areas like West Virginia or Ohio or upper Illinois. So really, it doesn't mean marginal to high risk. All this just symbolizes where I think we'll be seeing the most consistent and active March. So starting up with the light red there, that very widespread shade, the outer part. The light red symbolizes areas that we will be seeing severe weather, but it'll be very inconsistent, or we only might see one event or something like that. But it's gonna be very inconsistent. For those areas in the northern part of the light red, like Ohio, Indiana, those areas, you guys, that light red symbolizes that you guys will get possibly your first severe weather of the year so far. In that second shade of red, in that darker shade, that's where we're seeing a little bit more of an active severe weather season for March, or severe weather for the month of March, but it's still going to be very inconsistent. Might be one event, maybe two events there it's going to be kind of limited because of dry air between depending where you are in that shade of red, dark red. If you're like in Missouri or Indiana, it would be some colder air. But if you're like Mississippi or Georgia, we're just gonna be seeing kind of a lot more dry air there. So kind of limiting those two factors there. And that purple, that we'll be seeing, I guess, a lot more consistent severe weather, a lot more moisture when it comes to these, when we do have moisture in the areas, which would be, I guess, kind of not as frequent as you would want for severe weather, but still, whenever we have that moisture coming in these areas, that's where it kind of be, not every time, but most of the time, that purple. So that's going to be leading to some more active severe weather compared to the other areas in the dark red and light red. So again, if you're in the purple, it doesn't mean enhanced risk like the Weather Channel has. The purple just symbolizes we got seeing a moderately active, maybe generally average, maybe slightly above average. Now, if you're in that pink, and if you're in that pink there, you're that second to last shade. So if you're in that pink, I do believe you guys will be seeing in general an active season. So not season, but an active March. This map only symbolizes March, not the season. It symbolizes March. So if you're in that pink, I do believe that's kind of be seeing some decent activity above average. I do believe we will be seeing a lot of that moisture, that moist air there when it does come in. We will have kind of those areas right in that warm front, just outside the, I guess, just outside the dry line. So really watching for some unstable air. And in general, we're seeing some really early warm temperatures across these areas, reaching some mid 70s, upper 70s. Obviously, not gonna get too crazy in the 80s. That's more kind of towards Texas and Florida. But that's when we see in general the second most favorable regions. And if you're in that white, including western Mississippi and eastern Arkansas, that's kind of more in an isolated area outside big cities, just outside Memphis. Those are areas where I think we will be seeing our most active March in general compared to average. I do believe we'll be seeing our most moist air there, a ton of shear constantly, constant warm temperatures, really kind of getting outside those cold fronts. The cold fronts will kind of be more towards the east in those higher elevations in the Appalachians or Appalachians, but really that's where I think we'll be seeing, I guess, our most active region for the month of March. Again, doesn't mean we're beginning enhanced risk, high risk, anything like that. I do not expect that. However, the white just symbolizes where I think we'll be seeing the most activity throughout this month, specifically the second half. But hope you guys enjoyed the video, and bye guys.